At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I've always believed that family celebrations should be moments of joy. My granddaughter Kayla's wedding was supposed to be one of those perfect days, the kind that warms your heart whenever you remember it. Instead, it became the day I discovered just how my family really saw me. The morning of the wedding, I spent extra time getting ready. At 65, I'm not vain, but I wanted to look my best. I chose a pale blue dress that Harold, my late husband, had always loved, styled my silver hair carefully, and even applied a touch of the perfume he'd given me for our last anniversary before cancer took him 3 years ago. "You look beautiful, Margaret," I told my reflection, imagining Harold saying those words. I could almost hear his voice, feel his presence beside me. The ceremony at Gracewood Chapel was lovely. Kayla looked radiant walking down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness. My son Steven beamed proudly as he escorted her, and even my daughter-in-law Denise seemed genuinely emotional. For those brief moments, everything felt right. It was at the reception where everything changed. I arrived at the grand ballroom of the Oak Haven Hotel, making my way to the check-in table where guests were collecting their name tags and table assignments. The young woman at the table smiled as she rifled through the alphabetized cards. "Here you are, Mrs. Thompson," she said cheerfully, handing me my name tag. I glanced down, expecting to see Margaret Thompson, grandmother of the bride. Instead, in elegant calligraphy were the words, "The old lady who will pay for everything." My hand froze mid-air. Surely this was a mistake. "Is something wrong?" the young woman asked, noticing my expression. I forced a smile. "There seems to be a mix-up with my name tag." She leaned over to look. Her eyes widened. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me check if there's another one." "It's fine," I said quickly, not wanting to cause a scene at Kayla's wedding. "I'll speak with my family about it." I pinned the offensive tag to my dress and made my way into the ballroom, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Had Kayla approved this? Steven? Denise? Who thought this was appropriate, let alone funny? Throughout the cocktail hour, I tried to enjoy myself, chatting with other guests who either didn't notice my name tag or were too polite to mention it. Then I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Did you see the grandmother's name tag?" someone whispered with a snicker. "Denise said they thought it would be hilarious," another voice replied. "Apparently, she's their personal ATM." I moved away quickly, my hands shaking. Just then, Steven spotted me and waved me over to a group of well-dressed guests. "Mom!" he called, his voice carrying across the room. "Come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." I approached reluctantly. Bill Anderson looked vaguely familiar, one of Harold's business associates, perhaps. "Mom, this is Bill and Martha Anderson." Then he added with a laugh, "Mom, our walking bank account." Martha Anderson's smile faltered as she glanced at my name tag. Bill looked uncomfortable. "Margaret Thompson," I said firmly, extending my hand. "Harold's widow." "Of course," Bill said kindly. "Harold spoke of you often. He was very proud of you." The conversation continued, but I barely heard it. When the Andersons moved on, I pulled Steven aside. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing to my name tag. He laughed. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deep pockets since Dad left you everything." "It's humiliating," I said quietly. "Oh, please," he rolled his eyes. "Lighten up. It's a party." Before I could respond, Denise appeared, elegant in her mother-of-the-bride dress. "There you are, Margaret. Has Steven been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who's responsible for this gorgeous wedding." She winked, and they both laughed. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, needing a moment alone. As I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, the door opened and an older gentleman, in a well-tailored suit, entered, then backed out, apologizing. "Mrs. Thompson. Margaret, it's Thomas Bradley, Harold's attorney. Could I have a word?" I composed myself and stepped out. Thomas had handled Harold's estate and had always been kind to me. I couldn't help but notice he gestured vaguely toward my name tag in some of the comments. I sighed. Apparently, it's just a joke. Thomas's expression darkened. It's not funny, and Harold would have been furious. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. There's something you should know. Something Harold insisted I not tell you unless it became necessary. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. This is a codicil to Harold's will. He added it shortly before he passed. I opened it with trembling fingers and read. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me would be disinherited from their share of Harold's fortune, a fortune much larger than even I had realized. I looked up at Thomas, stunned. Why wouldn't he tell me this? He hoped it would never be needed, Thomas said quietly. He wanted them to treat you right because they loved you, not because they feared losing their inheritance. I glanced back toward the ballroom where my family celebrated, unaware that their behavior had just cost them millions. What do you want to do? Thomas asked. I carefully folded the document and handed it back to him. Nothing. Not yet. I need to see just how far they'll go. As I returned to the reception, the name tag felt heavier against my chest. But now, instead of shame, I felt something different stirring inside me. A determination to finally see my family for who they truly were. The morning after Kayla's wedding, I sat alone at my kitchen table, still in my bathrobe, staring at the offensive name tag I'd placed in front of me. The elegant calligraphy mocked me. The old lady who will pay for everything. I traced the letters with my fingertip, remembering how Harold would have reacted if he'd seen it. His temper was rare, but formidable when someone disrespected those he loved. They've changed, I whispered to the empty room, as if Harold could hear me. Or maybe they were always this way and we just didn't want to see it. I got up and moved to the living room, drawn to the large family portrait above the fireplace. It was taken 5 years ago on our 40th anniversary. Harold sat in the center, still robust despite the early signs of the illness that would later claim him. I stood beside him, my hand on his shoulder. Steven and Denise flanked us, and Kayla and her brother Ethan, then teenagers, stood in front. We looked happy. We looked like a family. When exactly had things changed? The question haunted me as I made my morning tea. Perhaps it had been gradual. So subtle I hadn't noticed the erosion of respect until it was too late. The first clear memory came just 6 months after Harold's funeral. Steven and Denise had invited me to dinner, a rare occurrence even then. They'd been unusually attentive, asking about my well-being, reminiscing about Harold. Then, over dessert, they'd broached the real purpose of the evening. "Mom," Steven had said, refilling my wine glass, "Denise and I have been thinking about remodeling our kitchen. Nothing fancy, just updating the appliances, new countertops, that sort of thing." "That sounds lovely," I'd replied, oblivious to what was coming. "The thing is," Denise continued smoothly, "with college tuition for the kids and everything else, we're a bit stretched right now." I remembered the pause, the expectant looks. "Are you asking me for money?" "Not asking," Steven had said quickly. "It's just that Dad left you quite comfortable, and we thought maybe you'd want to help out the family." I wrote them a check for $30,000 that evening. Looking back, that had been the beginning. Small requests became larger ones. A kitchen remodel became a full home renovation. Tuition assistance became luxury cars for both Kayla and Ethan when they turned 18. Family vacations that I was invited to join and expected to fund. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a box of financial records. Sitting on the floor like a schoolgirl, I began sorting through bank statements and canceled checks. The evidence of my financial support for Steven and Denise's lifestyle was overwhelming. Over 3 years, I had given them nearly $250,000. The phone rang, interrupting my tally. It was Denise. "Margaret, are you home? I've been calling your cell phone." I hadn't even noticed. My cell phone was still in my evening purse. "Yes, I'm home. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Stephen and I just wanted to thank you for everything. Yesterday was beautiful." "Yes, it was lovely," I said. "Kayla and Daniel are so grateful for your generosity. They couldn't have had such a wonderful wedding without you." I closed my eyes, remembering the $45,000 check I'd written for the venue and catering. I was happy to help. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," Denise continued, her voice taking on that syrupy quality I'd come to recognize. "Daniel's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but his father's business has been struggling, and they've had to back out. Kayla is just devastated." I could hear what was coming next. "We were wondering if you might be able to help. They've got their hearts set on 2 weeks in Bali. Stephen and I would contribute, of course, with everything we spent on the wedding." Everything they spent. I had covered almost all of it. "I'll think about it," I said, surprising both of us with my non-committal response. There was a pause. "Oh, well, they need to book soon to get the best rates." "I understand. I'll let you know tomorrow." After hanging up, I returned to my financial archaeology. Harold had always warned me about Stephen's relationship with money. "He sees it as the solution to everything," he told me once. "But money without values just creates more problems." I hadn't understood then, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to understand. A knock at the door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Ethan, my grandson, shifting nervously on the porch. I quickly gathered up the scattered financial papers and stashed them back in the closet before opening the door. "Grandma?" he said, stepping forward to hug me. At 21, he was tall like his grandfather with the same kind eyes. "Are you okay? I've been texting you." "I'm fine, sweetheart, just a bit tired after yesterday. Come in." He followed me to the kitchen where I put on the kettle for fresh tea. Ethan had always been different from the rest of them. More thoughtful, less fixated on appearances and status. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday," he said, sitting at the table. "The name tag, the way everyone was talking, it wasn't right." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed. So did a lot of people." He looked down, embarrassed. I should have said something. I patted his hand. "It's not your responsibility to correct your parents, but it is my responsibility to stand up for what's right." He looked directly at me. "Dad and Mom, they've changed since Grandpa died. Or maybe I just didn't see it before. All they talk about is money. Your money, specifically." "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated. "Last week, I overheard them discussing your house. Dad said something about how it's too big for one person and how they could help you downsize." The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to absorb this information. As I poured the hot water over the tea bags, I thought about Thomas Bradley and the codicil to Harold's will. I thought about the name tag, the constant requests for money, and now this, an apparent plan to move me out of my home. "Grandma!" Ethan's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you sure you're okay?" I set the teapot on the table and sat down across from him. "I'm better than okay. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in years." "What do you mean?" I smiled, making a decision. "Just that it's time for some changes around here." As we sipped our tea, I found myself studying my grandson's face, wondering if he was truly different from his parents, or if the seeds of entitlement were merely dormant, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. For the first time since Harold died, I felt a cold clarity replace my grief and loneliness. I wouldn't be making any hasty decisions, but I would be watching and waiting to see who in my family truly deserved the legacy Harold had left. 3 days after the wedding, Steven and Denise organized a post-wedding brunch at their country club. I deliberated whether to attend, but curiosity won out. I wanted to see if the name tag incident had been an anomaly or part of a pattern. I arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club dressed in a simple but elegant cream pantsuit that Harold had always said made me look regal. As I entered the private dining room, I noticed several guests from the wedding, including Kayla and her new husband Daniel, Ethan, and various relatives and friends. "Mom! Over here!" Stephen called, waving me toward the head table. Denise, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, gave me an air kiss. "Margaret, you look nice," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise. "We saved you a seat right here." I settled into the chair, noting that I'd been placed next to Daniel's parents, whom I barely knew, rather than near my grandchildren. The brunch proceeded pleasantly enough until Denise clinked her glass for attention. "We want to thank everyone for coming today and for helping make Kayla and Daniel's wedding so special," she began. "And, of course, a special thank you to Grandma Margaret, who has been so incredibly generous." All eyes turned to me. "In fact," Denise continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "we have an exciting announcement. Grandma will be funding Kayla and Daniel's dream honeymoon to Bali." There was a smattering of applause. I sat frozen, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I'd made no such commitment. "Mom?" Stephen prompted when I didn't immediately acknowledge the announcement. I carefully set my cup down. "This is the first I'm hearing of it," I said, keeping my voice level. An awkward silence fell over the table. Kayla looked confused, then embarrassed. Daniel stared at his plate. "Well, we discussed it yesterday," Denise said with a brittle laugh. "Remember, you said you'd think about it." "Yes, I did say that, and I'm still thinking." Stephen leaned over, speaking in a stage whisper clearly meant to be heard. "Mom, don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip." I felt something inside me snap, a thread that had been stretched too far for too long. I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon to Bali. In fact, I believe Daniel's parents were originally planning to cover this expense. Daniel's father shifted uncomfortably. "There were some business setbacks." "I understand," I said kindly. "These things happen, but I think it's inappropriate to publicly volunteer someone else's money without their agreement, don't you?" The table fell silent. Denise's face flushed red. "Perhaps Kayla and Daniel might consider a more modest honeymoon, one within their means." "Their means?" she hissed. "What about your means? Everyone knows Harold left you more than comfortable." Something in her tone, the entitlement, the resentment, made my decision clear. My financial situation is not up for public discussion, and neither are my spending choices. Stephen grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing us." I pulled my arm away. "No, Stephen, you've embarrassed yourselves." I stood up, smoothing my jacket. "Kayla, Daniel, I wish you both every happiness. I'd be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, but I'll discuss that with you privately." As I turned to leave, Ethan stood up as well. "I'll walk you out, Grandma." In the lobby, away from prying eyes, I finally let my composure slip. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. "Are you okay to drive?" Ethan asked gently. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm fine, just a bit shaken." "You should be proud of yourself. That took courage." I looked at my grandson, really looked at him. In that moment, he reminded me so much of Harold, it made my heart ache. "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight?" I asked impulsively. Ethan smiled. "I'd like that." Later that evening, as we sat in my kitchen sharing a simple meal of roast chicken, I found myself confiding in Ethan about his parents' behavior over the past 3 years, the constant financial demands, the gradual erosion of respect. "I'm not surprised," he said sadly. "I've watched it happening. After Grandpa died, it was like they saw you as, I don't know, an ATM," I supplied. He nodded. "And it's getting worse. Last week I overheard them talking about your house again." "What did they say?" Ethan hesitated. "They were discussing how to convince you to move into Willow Grove, the retirement home." I was stunned. My house was my sanctuary, filled with memories of the life Harold and I had built together. "Dad said it would be better for everyone if you downsized. He mentioned something about the real estate market being hot and how they could help you maximize your investment." I felt sick. They weren't just after my money. They wanted my home too. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you," I said, deciding to trust him with the truth about Harold's codicil. But before I could continue, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Steven's car in the driveway. "It's your father," I said. Ethan's expression hardened. "You don't have to answer it." But I was done hiding. "No, I think it's time we cleared the air." I opened the door to find Steven standing there, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell was that performance at brunch?" he demanded, pushing past me into the hallway. Then he spotted Ethan. "What are you doing here?" "Having dinner with Grandma. Something the rest of you might try sometime without asking for money." Steven's face darkened. "Stay out of this, Ethan. This is between your mother and me." "No," I said firmly. "If we're going to have this conversation, Ethan stays. I'm tired of the private manipulation, Steven. Let's put everything on the table." And in that moment, looking at my son's angry face and my grandson's protective stance, I knew we had reached the breaking point. There would be no going back. "I've had enough of your attitude, Mom," Steven said, pacing my living room like a caged animal. "First the scene at the brunch, and now I find you've been poisoning Ethan's mind against us?" I sat calmly in Harold's old armchair, hands folded in my lap. Ethan stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching his father with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. "No one is poisoning anyone's mind," I replied evenly. "We're simply acknowledging what's been happening in this family since your father died." "And what exactly is that?" Steven demanded. "You and Denise have been treating Grandma like a bank, not a person," Ethan said before I could answer. "The name tag at the wedding, volunteering her to pay for Kayla's honeymoon without asking first, talking about selling her house behind her back. You've been spying on us?" Steven's face flushed darker. "I've been paying attention," Ethan countered. "Something you might try sometime." Steven turned to me, his expression shifting to the conciliatory tone he always used when he wanted something. "Mom, you're misunderstanding everything. We're just trying to help you manage your finances wisely. You're not getting any younger, and—" "I'm 65, Steven, not 95, I interrupted. "My mind is perfectly sharp, and I'm more than capable of managing my own affairs." "But Dad left you so much." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Harold left me exactly what he intended to leave me. His estate is not a family piggy bank." Steven's false smile vanished. "So, what are you saying? You're cutting us off because Denise made one stupid joke with a name tag?" "I'm saying that from now on, I'll be making my own decisions about my money and my home. If Kayla and Daniel want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save for it like most young couples do. If you and Denise want a bigger house, you can work for it." Steven stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Then he turned to Ethan. I want to speak to my mother alone. I'm staying, Ethan said firmly. This is family business. Exactly, Ethan replied. And I'm family. Something shifted in Steven's expression, a calculation, a reassessment. He'd always been able to manipulate me when we were alone, playing on my emotions, my grief for Harold, my desire to keep the peace. But with Ethan present, those tactics wouldn't work. Fine, he snapped, heading for the door. But this isn't over, Mom. Not by a long shot. After he left, Ethan let out a long breath. I'm sorry, Grandma. For what, sweetheart? You've done nothing wrong. For not standing up sooner, for letting them treat you this way. I rose and hugged him tightly. You're standing up now. That's what matters. After Ethan left, I sat in the quiet of my home, thinking about Harold, about the codicil to his will, and about the family we'd raised together. Had we gone wrong somewhere with Steven? Or had he always had the streak of entitlement that we'd failed to see? More importantly, what was I going to do now? The answer came slowly, taking shape in my mind like a photograph developing. Instead of confronting Steven and Denise directly with the codicil, which would only make them change their behavior out of fear rather than respect, I would simply let them continue showing their true colors. Meanwhile, I would quietly reclaim my life and my independence. The next morning, I called Thomas Bradley. Margaret, he answered warmly, I've been hoping to hear from you after the wedding. Yes, that's partly why I'm calling. I explained what happened at the brunch and Steven's visit afterward. I need to understand exactly what Harold left in his will, Thomas. Not just the codicil, but everything. There was a pause. Perhaps this would be better discussed in person. Could you come to my office this afternoon? 3 hours later, I sat across from Thomas in his well-appointed office as he explained the full extent of Harold's estate. The numbers took my breath away. Harold built several companies over his lifetime and sold them at just the right moments. His investments were extremely conservative, which means they weathered the economic downturns beautifully. I knew we were comfortable, I said faintly, but this... Harold was a private man when it came to money. He didn't believe in flaunting wealth. Thomas smiled. He always said you married him when he had nothing but potential in a beat-up Chevy, so he never wanted you to become one of those women who only care about designer labels and country club memberships. I laughed softly, hearing Harold's voice in those words. That sounds like him. As for the codicil, Thomas continued, it's straightforward but powerful. Any descendant who publicly humiliates you forfeits their entire inheritance. The name tag at the wedding would certainly qualify. And the brunch? That too, most likely. But Margaret, you don't have to make any decisions right now. The codicil remains in effect for your lifetime. I nodded, thinking, what if I wanted to make some changes of my own? To my will? To how my assets are managed? Thomas leaned forward. What did you have in mind? By the time I left Thomas's office, I had a plan. No dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums. Just a quiet reclaiming of my life and my independence. First, I called my old friend Eleanor, whom I hadn't seen much since Harold's death. We arranged to meet for lunch the following day. Then I stopped by the community center and picked up a brochure for their adult education classes. Harold had always encouraged me to pursue my interest in painting. Perhaps it was time. At home, I set up my computer and began researching small business loans. Ethan had mentioned wanting to open a bookstore after college, but was worried about the startup costs. A genuine investment in my grandson's future seemed like a perfect use of some of my resources. When my phone rang and I saw it was Denise, I let it go to voicemail. The old Margaret would have answered immediately, anxious about what emergency or demand might be coming. But that Margaret was fading away, replaced by a woman who was finally recognizing her own worth. The voicemail, when I listened to it later, was exactly what I expected. Margaret, it's Denise. Steven told me about your conversation last night. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've always had your best interests at heart. Steven and I were thinking we should have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Oh, and Kayla mentioned you'd reconsidered about the honeymoon. They really need to book soon to get the best rates. Call me back. I deleted the message without returning the call. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a modest check as a wedding gift for Kayla and Daniel. Enough for a nice honeymoon, but in New England, perhaps not Bali. I enclosed it in a card with a warm note wishing them happiness, then sealed the envelope. My silent strategy had begun. No confrontations, no drama, just quiet, firm boundaries. Harold would have approved. 6 months passed in a blur of quiet but significant changes. I enrolled in painting classes at the community center, reconnected with old friends, and spent more time with Ethan, who visited regularly. I provided him with seed money for his bookstore business plan, which was coming along beautifully. Meanwhile, Steven and Denise's attitude toward me oscillated between chilly distance and desperate attempts to reestablish their access to my finances. When the silent treatment failed to yield results, they would suddenly appear with forced smiles and transparent excuses to visit. Each time, they would eventually steer the conversation toward money, a renovation they were planning, Kayla's desire to buy a house with Daniel, their own retirement concerns. Each time, I politely declined to engage. Discussing my finances has become exhausting, became my mantra, delivered with a smile that grew more confident with each repetition. They didn't take the rejection well. Denise's texts became increasingly hostile, Steven's calls more demanding, but I had found a new strength in my silence, in the boundaries I was finally enforcing. Today was my birthday, my 66th, and despite my protests, Ethan had insisted on organizing a small family gathering at my home. It's time they remember whose house this is, he'd said with a grim determination that reminded me so much of Harold. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading roses and drawing peace from the simple task. The garden had been another casualty of the past 3 years. I'd neglected it while catering to Steven and Denise's demands. Now it was coming back to life, much like I was. By mid-afternoon, my home was ready for guests. Ethan arrived early to help with final preparations. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, arranging cheese and crackers on a platter. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my new dress, a bold red I would never have chosen before. "Besides, it's just dinner." But we both knew it was more than that. This was the first time in months that the entire family would be together under my roof. Steven and Denise, Kayla and Daniel, and even a few of Harold's old friends, including Thomas Bradley. The doorbell rang precisely at 5. Steven and Denise stood on the porch, their smiles so artificial I could almost hear the plastic stretching. "Happy birthday, Mom," Steven said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. "Margaret, you look different," Denise added, her eyes taking in my new dress, my styled hair, the subtle makeup I'd applied with techniques learned from a class at the community center. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping back to let them enter. Kayla and Daniel arrived moments later, followed by Thomas and another couple who had been close friends with Harold and me. I moved through the greetings and small talk with a composure I would have found impossible 6 months ago. As we settled in the dining room, I couldn't help but notice Steven's gaze moving around the house, assessing, calculating. Denise's eyes kept returning to the new painting hanging on the wall, a landscape I'd created myself. "Did you redecorate, Margaret?" she asked, her tone suggesting she found the changes disturbing. "Just a few updates," I replied. "I've been taking painting classes." Painting classes, Stephen echoed, as if I had said I was learning to fly spaceships. Grandma's really talented, Ethan said proudly. She's already sold 2 pieces at the community art fair. Sold? Denise looked genuinely confused. But why would you need to sell paintings? I smiled. It's not about need, Denise. It's about joy. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken by Daniel asking about the bookstore Ethan was planning. It's coming along great, Ethan said. Thanks to Grandma, I've got the business plan finalized and I'm looking at locations. Stephen's head snapped up. Thanks to Grandma? What does that mean? Ethan met his father's gaze steadily. Grandma's investing in my bookstore. Investing? Stephen's voice rose. With what money? My money, I said quietly. But, Stephen began, then caught himself, glancing at the other guests. Maybe we should discuss this privately, Mom. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. I'm making my own financial decisions now. Stephen's face darkened. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Kayla interrupted with a story about their honeymoon to Cape Cod, the destination they'd chosen after receiving my modest gift. The conversation shifted, tension temporarily diffused. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Denise cornered me in the kitchen. Margaret, what's going on with you? She demanded in a harsh whisper. First, you refused to help with the honeymoon, then we hear nothing from you for months, and now you're throwing money at Ethan's pipe dream? It's not a pipe dream, I replied calmly. It's a solid business plan. Don't be naive, Denise. Bookstores aren't profitable anymore. He's using you. No, Denise, I'm supporting my grandson's ambition. There's a difference. Her eyes narrowed. Steven and I have been talking. We think it's time you consider moving somewhere more manageable. Willow Grove has lovely apartments, and the money from selling this house could help all of us. So there it was. The plan Ethan had overheard, now brought into the open. This house isn't for sale, I said firmly, and my living arrangements aren't up for family discussion. Before she could respond, Stephen appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Just wonderful, I said, picking up the cake I'd baked that morning. Shall we have dessert in the living room? Stephen cleared his throat as I began cutting the cake. Before we move on, Mom, there's something Denise and I want to discuss with everyone. My hand stilled on the cake knife. This wasn't part of the evening I had planned. We've been concerned about Mom's decisions lately, Stephen announced to the room. She's making unwise financial choices, isolating herself, and refusing family guidance. A stunned silence fell over the room. We think it's time to consider a power of attorney arrangement, he continued, for her own protection. Thomas Bradley set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. That's a serious step, Stephen. Do you have evidence of diminished capacity? She's giving away money to fund a bookstore in the digital age, he replied, as if that explained everything. And she's refusing to consider sensible downsizing options. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This moment had been inevitable from the day I'd started saying no. Your mother seems perfectly competent to me, Thomas observed, his voice measured but firm. Making decisions you disagree with is not evidence of incapacity. You don't understand, Stephen insisted, his voice rising. She's always relied on Dad and then on me for financial guidance. Now suddenly she's making these irrational choices? Enough. I set down the cake knife, my voice cutting through the tension like steel. I am not irrational, incapacitated, or in need of your guidance, Stephen. Mom, be reasonable. I've been reasonable for 3 years, I interrupted. I've paid for renovations, vacations, cars, and a wedding. I've allowed you to treat me like a walking checkbook rather than your mother. But that stops now. Stephen's face flushed dark red. Is this what you want? He demanded, gesturing around the table. To humiliate us in front of everyone? To make us look like villains? No, Stephen, I said quietly. You've managed that all on your own. You selfish old woman, he hissed, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled. After everything we've done for you? Stephen! Denise tugged at his arm, suddenly aware of how this looked to the others. But Stephen was beyond caring. You think you can just cut us off? Dad would be ashamed of you! It was at that precise moment that Thomas Bradley cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change everything. Actually, Stephen, he said, his voice steady, your father anticipated this exact situation. The silence that followed Thomas's words was absolute. Stephen stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as Thomas reached into his jacket and removed a familiar envelope. Harold added a codicil to his will shortly before he passed. He was concerned about how Margaret might be treated after he was gone. What kind of codicil? Denise demanded, finding her voice first. Thomas looked to me, silently asking permission. I nodded. The codicil states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Margaret forfeits their entire inheritance. This includes treating her with disrespect, attempting to control her finances against her wishes, or trying to force her from her home. That's ridiculous, Stephen sputtered. Dad would never. He did, Thomas interrupted. And as executor of his estate, I've been documenting the incidents over the past several months. He turned to me. Margaret, I have to ask, do you want to enforce the codicil? All eyes turned to me. I looked at Steven and Denise, their faces now pale with shock and dawning horror. I looked at Kayla, who seemed confused and embarrassed. Then I looked at Ethan, whose expression held nothing but quiet support. Yes, I said finally. I do. Stephen collapsed back into his chair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. The name tag at the wedding, the honeymoon announcement at the brunch, the constant demands for money, and now this attempt to declare me incompetent, all of it stops today. But our inheritance, Denise whispered, is forfeit, Thomas confirmed. All of it. Kayla? She asked, her voice small. Her too? Thomas consulted his notes. Kayla was present at several incidents but didn't actively participate in the humiliation. However, she also never spoke up to defend Margaret. Kayla's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have said something at the wedding about the name tag. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The question is what we learn from them. So what happens now? Daniel asked, putting his arm around Kayla. Now, Thomas said, according to the terms of the codicil, Steven and Denise's share of Harold's estate is redistributed. To whom? Steven demanded. Half goes to Margaret outright, Thomas explained. The other half is divided among descendants who have shown her proper respect and care. All eyes turned to Ethan, who looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know, he said quickly. I swear, Grandma, I had no idea about any of this. I know, sweetheart. Your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become. Stephen stood up again, his face contorted with anger. This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll contest it in court. You're welcome to try, Thomas said calmly, but the codicil is legally binding, and we have ample evidence of the conditions being met. Margaret, Denise began, her voice suddenly honey-sweet, surely we can work this out. As a family, we never meant— Save it, Denise, I cut in. It's too late for that. So that's it? Stephen demanded. After everything we've done for you, you're just cutting us off? No, Stephen, I said, standing to face my son directly. After everything I've done for you, I'm finally standing up for myself. There's a difference. The gathering ended shortly after. Kayla and Daniel left with awkward apologies and promises to call soon. Stephen and Denise stormed out without another word. Thomas and the other guests made tactful exits, leaving just Ethan and I in the sudden quiet of my home. Are you okay? He asked, helping me clear the barely touched dessert plates. I'm better than okay, I replied, surprised to find it was true. I feel free. 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of Chapter 1, the bookstore Ethan had finally opened in a charming converted Victorian house downtown. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves of carefully curated books and comfortable reading nooks. A coffee counter staffed by Ethan's girlfriend Lily served locally roasted beans and homemade pastries. In the children's section, a mural I had painted covered one wall, a whimsical forest scene with hidden animals and fairy houses for young readers to discover. Twice a week, I led story time for neighborhood children, something I'd never imagined myself doing before. The small apartment upstairs had been renovated as well. Not for me, I still loved my home with its memories of Harold, but for a young writer in residence program, Ethan had established with part of his inheritance. The bell over the door jingled, and Kayla stepped in, pushing a stroller with their 3-month-old daughter, Roberta, named after her grandfather. "Grandma!" Kayla called, spotting me. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "Just dropping off some new bookmarks I painted," I said, bending to admire baby Roberta. "Hello, little one." Over the past year, Kayla and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship. After the initial shock of the inheritance revelation, she had made genuine efforts to connect with me independently of her parents. Daniel had proven to be a steadying influence, encouraging her to form her own opinions rather than echoing her mother's. Steven and Denise were a different story. After several failed attempts to contest the codicil, they had moved to Florida, where Steven had taken a job with a former business associate. Our communication was limited to terse Christmas cards and occasional updates through Kayla. "Have you heard from your parents lately?" I asked as Kayla settled at a small table with the baby. "Mom called last week. Same conversation as always. Complaints about Dad's job, the house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Kayla said firmly. "They made their choices. I've made mine." She looked around the bookstore and smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "This place feels like hope, Grandma. Like something real and warm. Every time I come here, I feel like I'm part of something good." I felt a swell of emotion rise in my chest. "You are, sweetheart. You're building your own life, your own family. That's something to be proud of." As we chatted, Lily came over with 2 lattes and a warm scone, placing them on the table with a grin. "On the house," she said, "for our honorary founder and our youngest reader." I laughed, touched by the gesture. Watching Lily and Ethan build this dream together reminded me so much of Harold and myself in the early days, full of plans, willing to work long hours for something they believed in. "We're doing a poetry reading on Thursday night," Lily added. "Ethan said you might read something?" "If I can finish it in time," I said. "I've been working on a piece about letting go of old pain." "Well, whenever it's ready, I'm sure it'll be beautiful," Lily replied, heading back to the coffee counter. Kayla leaned closer. "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I said. "But I don't carry the grief like I used to. It's softened somehow. I think I think Harold would have been proud that I finally stopped letting people walk all over me." "He absolutely would," Kayla agreed. That night, back at home, I took out my old leather-bound notebook. I'd started writing in it during the darkest months after Harold passed. At first, just scattered thoughts and half-formed memories, then slowly shaping into stories, reflections, and poems. On the final page, I wrote the last lines of the piece I'd been working on. "I was once the background noise of my own life, polite and small, ever obliging. But the silence after grief taught me my own name. And now I speak it clear and loud, in a voice that is mine, and mine alone." I closed the notebook and exhaled. It felt done. Complete. On Thursday evening, the bookstore buzzed with soft conversation and the clink of coffee mugs. A microphone had been set up near the front window, where a string of warm fairy lights framed a makeshift stage. The chairs were full. Neighbors, students, friends of Ethan and Lily, all gathered for the first official poetry night at Chapter 1. I waited near the back, sipping my tea and listening to a young college student read an aching piece about her first heartbreak. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone with trembling hands. But as I looked out at the faces in the audience, Ethan, Kayla, Daniel, Lily, even Thomas Bradley, I felt something unexpected. Peace. "Good evening. My name is Margaret, and I've spent most of my life being the nice one. the agreeable one, the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But this is a poem about the moment I decided that my peace mattered too. I read slowly, letting each word settle. When I reached the final line, the room was silent for a beat, before erupting into applause. Kayla stood, clapping hard, tears in her eyes. Ethan hugged me tightly as I stepped down. "That was amazing, Grandma! Really! You're incredible!" "Thank you, sweetheart." I looked around the room, at the warm lights, the shelves of books, the people who had come together for stories and poetry, and felt Harold beside me somehow, his hand on my shoulder, proud. Over the next few months, the bookstore became a community hub. We hosted book clubs, art classes, open mics. A local school partnered with us for after-school reading programs. I found purpose in small things: curating the senior fiction section, baking scones for Saturday mornings, and sharing stories with children whose eyes lit up at every page. Stephen's absence no longer felt like a wound. It was a scar, yes, but one I carried with quiet dignity. Denise, too, had faded into the background. There had been no further attempts to regain access to the inheritance. I suspected they were biding their time, waiting for something to shift. It didn't matter. The codicil was airtight, and more importantly, my resolution was unwavering. One spring afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten, shaky script, from Denise. "Margaret, I know you have every reason to ignore this. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was angry, scared, and desperate. I didn't realize how much damage we were doing until it was too late. I miss you. I miss Kayla. I know I may never earn your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. Take care." I read the letter twice. Then I placed it in a drawer. Not out of spite, but because I wasn't ready. Forgiveness, if it came, would have to be on my terms, in my time. A few weeks later, Kayla called me, excited. "Grandma, we're expecting again." "Another baby?" I laughed. "That's wonderful, darling. We want you to be the first to know. And if it's a girl, we're thinking of naming her Margaret." My eyes welled with tears. I'd be honored. At the new baby's gender reveal picnic, surrounded by friends and family in the local park, a cloud of pink confetti burst into the air. Everyone cheered. Kayla ran to hug me, belly already rounding beneath her sundress. "I want her to grow up strong," she whispered, "like you." "Then you're already giving her the best start," I said, holding her close. As I watched Ethan play guitar under the trees, Lily singing softly beside him, and children dancing on the grass, and Daniel lifting little Roberta onto his shoulders, I realized something. I hadn't just reclaimed my dignity. I'd rewritten the story of my life. Not with revenge or bitterness, but with boundaries, grace, and truth. I'd found my voice, and once I did, I never let it go again. And that, more than anything, was what Harold would have wanted. For me to live. Not quietly, not in the background, but fully, fiercely, and with love. The years that followed were quieter in the best way. I no longer measured my worth by how much I gave or how small I could make myself to keep others comfortable. I woke each morning with a gentle sense of purpose. Whether I was shelving books at chapter 1, baking lemon scones for Kayla's visits, or simply sitting on my porch with a good novel and a cup of tea, I felt full. Not busy, not burdened, just whole. The baby, little Margaret, was born in late summer. She arrived on a clear morning with her mother's eyes and a determined little cry that made me laugh the first time I heard it. I held her in my arms while Kayla rested, and Ethan looked on, blurry-eyed but beaming. "She's perfect," I whispered, "and she's going to be a firecracker." "Like someone else I know," Ethan said with a grin. From the moment she could walk, Margaret was a force. She'd pull books off low shelves at the store and demand to be read to. She toddled around in rain boots and tutus, unbothered by what anyone thought. I saw a reflection of myself in her spirit. Not the woman I had been most of my life, but the woman I had finally become. and I swore, silently, that no one would ever teach her to shrink. One evening, as the sun set gold over the hills, I sat with Harold's photo beside me on the porch. Kayla had brought a framed picture from their wedding and placed it next to my old one. The two stood side by side, Harold in his navy suit and kind smile, Ethan with his unruly curls and the same crinkle at the corner of his eyes. "You'd be proud of them," I said aloud. "They've built something strong, honest." And I finally did too. The wind rustled the trees, and I imagined Harold smiling. That fall, I received a formal letter from Denise. Not handwritten this time, but typed and carefully worded. She was requesting a sit-down conversation. No threats, no demands, just a meeting. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After all, I owed her nothing. But another part of me, the part that had grown over these years of rebuilding, felt something else. Not obligation, but curiosity. I agreed to meet her in the public park on a Sunday afternoon. When I arrived, Denise was already seated at a bench beneath a sycamore tree, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked older, thinner, her sharpness dulled by time and perhaps regret. "Margaret," she said, standing, "thank you for coming." I sat down, nodding but silent. I didn't plan to make this easy for her. She took a deep breath. "I know I can't undo what I did. I know I hurt you, and I hurt Kayla. I was wrong. I was scared of being left behind, of losing everything, and instead of being honest, I manipulated and schemed. I see that now." "And?" I said, calm but firm. "And I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm not here to weasel back into your life. I just wanted you to know that I've been in therapy. I've made changes. I've started volunteering at the women's shelter. I'm not trying to be applauded. I just want you to know that your decision, cutting me out, made me look at myself for the first time." I studied her face. There was no makeup. Her eyes weren't defiant like they used to be. There was no performance. Just a woman who had fallen and maybe learned something. "I appreciate the apology, and I hope you continue doing the work. But don't mistake this meeting for reconciliation. I've found peace, and I intend to keep it." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "That's fair. I'm glad you're okay. Truly." As I walked away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt clean, like I had finally shut a door that had creaked open too many times. That winter, Daniel proposed to Roberta. She said yes, laughing through tears in the same park where we met Denise. They planned a spring wedding, and Kayla and I helped with the details: flowers, menu, guest lists. Daniel asked me to walk him down the aisle. "You've always been more of a mother to me than I ever deserved," he said. "I'd be honored." On the day of the wedding, the sun poured down over the blooming garden where they exchanged vows. Harold wore soft blue, and Daniel couldn't stop smiling. After the ceremony, he came to me with a small gift box. "Open it," he said. Inside was a silver locket. One side held a photo of us at the bookstore, arms around each other. The other side was empty. "For whoever you want," he said. But I figured we should be in there. I hugged him, tears slipping down my cheeks. "You are my son in every way that matters." That night, I sat on my porch again, the locket around my neck. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Harold, for loving me, for giving me Ethan, for giving me the strength to walk through fire and come out stronger." I thought of little Margaret and all the generations to come, and how they might carry pieces of us forward. Our courage, our laughter, our love of stories. I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. I had no illusions that life would be perfect, but I had built something real, rooted and resilient. And no matter who tried to take it from me, I had learned this truth: no one decides my worth. No one writes my story but me. If you've ever been made to feel small, by family, by betrayal, by silence, I hope you hear this and remember that it is never too late to reclaim your voice, your power, your peace. Because sometimes the best revenge is not rage, but joy. Not war, but growth. Not bitterness, but becoming everything they said you could never be. That's the story I live now. That's the legacy I'll leave. And it all started the moment I stopped waiting for an apology and gave myself permission to be free. The end. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories like this one.